Hello and welcome to the myCast podcast, the podcast that is your all-access pass to the best casting conversations around. With your myCast podcast castings, Nico and, well, not Yannick. Yannick is currently unavailable. He is very busy with his finals, as am I. I've got one more final to deal with. But I've got enough time that I can get this episode out for you guys. And this is one that is very interesting, particularly for me, and especially if you've watched the recent episode that we posted about Hollywood and his lack of creativity. The issue of finding Hollywood originals nowadays, while there are just franchise after franchise after franchise being pumped out for us to watch. Now, one question that has come up many times is, will the internet be able to step into Hollywood? This has been a long discussion for the past 10 plus years, particularly when it comes to YouTubers and their video capabilities and trying to translate that into the current movie, TV show business. That has been, so far, more or less successful, relatively unsuccessful, if you think of, Smosh the movie, for example. But it's not a finished battle. Markiplier, a famous YouTuber, for those of you who are unaware, he does a lot of gaming, specifically horror games, which is what I will lead to here. He's releasing a horror movie this coming January 2026. It's called Iron Lung, which, if you are into the horror movie, horror video game business, that name should ring a bell. Iron Lung is a horror game that follows a protagonist who is living in this submarine and is exploring oceans on some desolate, faraway planet, which features, many jump scare opportunities. The marine wildlife that lives even in our own oceans is quite interesting, let alone alien wildlife that lives, deep in the ocean. That is the basis for his movie called Iron Lung. It will feature himself playing the protagonist and Caroline Kaplan, who has received nominations for Best Actress for a short film and also Best Lead Performance in the same short film. I forget what it was called. She's also appeared in shows like Orange is the New Black and Proof, for anyone who is aware of those shows. So a bit of a CV. So it seems that this is going to be a pretty seriously taken movie. This is not some, half-hearted attempt at making a movie. This is a big deal. And I'm very curious to see how this plays out, because it seems that there's a pretty large movement, at least in the last 5 or so years, of more and more internet creators producing short films and other high-quality content, but posting it on YouTube to avoid all of the distribution channels and the gatekeeping of Hollywood. So I'm very curious to see how this will not only perform in theaters, but also how it might affect others to try and make movies who previously were not in the film industry in Hollywood. Now, I bring this up because there are actually companies that are working on this very thing. For those who are not in the know, there's a company called Camp Studios. They're a movie studio company that it was created by YouTubers, by internet creators. And they are currently showing their first movie, Two Sleepy People, in theaters across the US right now. They've showed it this past Friday, December 5th. They showed it in 30 theaters across the nation. And the Friday, 1 or 2 weeks prior, they had showed it in another 30 theaters. So 60 theaters across the nation, they have showed this film already. And that's following a film festival that they hosted in April. I was fortunate enough to attend this film festival. Great experience. I loved the film. I have not seen its currently revised version of the film. I know the original version that was shown at in the film festival, but I'm not aware of how it has been changed for its theatrical release. Now, this company is something that I've kept my eye on for the past couple of years. They've had an interesting coming about story. The company is headed by a guy named Max Reisinger, who has a YouTube channel somewhere in the 700,000 subscriber range. Simon Kim, who originally got started on TikTok, also created a YouTube channel somewhere in the 300,000 or 400,000 subscriber range. So big personalities behind this, and there are other names, Chris Duncan, and originally Ryan Ng. Got started with a company called Creator Camp. It was kind of an events business, so to speak, that brought together a bunch of internet creators who focused not necessarily on, how should we put this, the Mr. Beastification of videos, where everything was scientifically nailed down to a T in terms of maximizing retention, but rather creating a story of something that a person can actually relate to. It wasn't a succession of dopamine hits like, you know, Mr. Beast videos, for example, but more so a personal, relatable story that found huge audiences in many cases. A lot of their videos have hundreds of thousands, if not even millions of views. This is something to take seriously. So they created this events business and got many contacts of various different internet creators, and eventually they decided to create this movie studio company, Camp Studios, and create some films, see what capabilities these people actually have. And so their first big test was this film festival in April, where they showed that, yes, they can sell out an entire 1,200-person theater for a film festival. This is a big step when it comes to getting a film recognized and distributed nationally. So they've proved that. Then the question was, how do we get this into theaters, you know, nationwide? How do we break this barrier between internet creation and Hollywood production movie theaters? Normally, historically, this has been quite gate-kept. It's very difficult to get a movie into theaters, but now they are in the process of breaking that barrier down. They describe the company as being a sort of bridge between the internet creators and the movie theaters. And so this has been very interesting to watch from the sidelines. And I look forward to seeing what they do in the future. They are currently working, presumably, on another theatrical release sometime in the next few weeks. And after that, presumably, more movies to come. I very much look forward to seeing what happens. And yeah. Now, having said all that, I want to go back to a comment I made about viewership. With these creators, Max Reisinger, Simon Kim, Natalie Lynn is another big one in this kind of genre of YouTube creation. The amount of views they get, I've always wondered, like, what does a typical movie get in terms of per person viewership? How many people go and actually watch these films? So I did some math. I know, boring. Movies are not supposed to be about math, but I want to do some math here. Take Zootopia as an example. This was a big film, grossed $1 billion worldwide. In the domestic market in the US, about $340 million in domestic ticket sales. So, if you do the math, average ticket price of about $12, that's 28 million views, roughly. That is a lot of views compared to the internet creators in this genre. That is out of the park. But there are other internet creators that have gotten more than 1 million, 2 million views. If you're kind of in the know about this genre of YouTube creation, and short film specifically, You'll probably know the film Nothing Except Everything, Nothing Except Everything by Wesley Wang. That video had 9 million views, which, if you do the same math off of the same $12 ticket price on average, that's $108 million in gross revenue. That's quite comparable to movies that get into theaters. So really, it shouldn't be that big of a jump to get a video that can do 9 million views into a theater. There's clearly a large audience available for this kind of content. The question is, why is that not more common in Hollywood? I find this to be quite an interesting question, and perhaps I'll explain this more in a future episode, but I wonder if it has a lot to do with recent events that have plagued the movie industry. The movie industry has been kind of slowing down, increase in ticket prices to kind of make up for the slowing down of people going to movie theaters. And then the COVID-19 pandemic obviously hit as well. And so the movie industry is still trying to get back to its pre-pandemic levels of viewership and obviously revenue. So I'm wondering if a lot of it is just a risk calculation of franchises are more or less guaranteed to make a profit, good, and the type of movies, as we talked about in a previous episode, movie distribution and the type of content that can be made often depends on the technology available and how revenue streams can bring about profit for a movie. Something like Good Will Hunting from late 90s time when DVDs were a huge thing, that kind of content can't really be made anymore because that in that time period when DVDs were still a large part of the gross revenue for a movie, you could afford to not make all of your profit in the theaters. However, nowadays with movie streaming services, you can't take that risk anymore. So I wonder if that's kind of the main thing of, movie studios are not wanting to take a big risk. They're still trying to get back to where they were pre-pandemic, and are still quite a long ways away from it. And they don't want to risk, a couple of $1 million worth of a production on a movie that ends up flopping. Interesting story that maybe would have done well in the 90s, but maybe wouldn't do so well today. However, I think that the work that is being done here by Camp Studios, for example, kind of shows that there is an audience and an appetite for this different kind of content, particularly because there seems to be a lot of moviegoer fatigue. All of these franchises and everything, there's a lot of fatigue from viewers, it seems, for this kind of content of superheroes and everything. The excitement for that kind of a movie isn't what it used to be. So I wonder if, the work here that Camp Studios and even Markiplier here is doing with his movie Iron Lung can kind of show that movies and movie theaters don't have to rely on franchises in order to make money, in order to be successful. And that there's actually a lot of great stories, great production abilities outside of Hollywood. If you have any thoughts on that, I would love to hear it in the comments below. I think this is definitely a topic that I'll touch on again because there's, quite frankly, a lot to discuss when it comes to the direction that Hollywood wants to go. But yeah, if you have any thoughts, comments, concerns, opinions, please write them in the comments below. I look forward to seeing what you guys have to say. And yeah, thank you all for tuning into the podcast. I know this is a short episode. I've been dealing with exams for this last week and before that crunch time at the end of the semester. You can assume that a more regular schedule will be resumed after this week. Thank you so much for your patience in the last 2 weeks of not having an episode posted. We should resume that again. So yeah, thank you so much for watching, and I will talk to you all later.